My audio story. You think this is a joke? Victoria Thorne's voice cut through the air like broken glass. Her perfectly manicured nails were still raised from where she'd struck me, her lips twisted into a sneer that made her Botoxed face look like a Halloween mask. You waltz in here looking like a walking skeleton and think we'll just hand you a contract. The sound echoed through the glass-walled office like a gunshot. My cheek burned hot. The sting was spreading across my face as I stumbled backward, my hand flying to the red mark blooming across my skin. The modeling agency's waiting room fell dead silent. Every aspiring model, every assistant, every person in that sterile, white marble prison stopped breathing. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. I could feel 20 pairs of eyes burning into me, some shocked, others secretly pleased to see someone else get destroyed. My legs shook. My vision blurred. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't understand what was happening. Because 30 seconds ago, I thought I was about to become a supermodel. Now I was standing here, face on fire, watching my dreams crumble like ash in the wind. And the worst part? Victoria wasn't done. "Look at yourself," she hissed, circling me like a predator. 95 pounds soaking wet. Collarbones sharp enough to cut glass. You look like you haven't eaten in a month. Do you know what happens when we put girls like you on magazine covers? I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Just a small, broken sound that made Victoria's eyes light up with cruel satisfaction. "We get boycotted," she screamed, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "We get protesters outside our building. We get accused of promoting eating disorders. You want to know why? Because you look sick." Hey everyone, welcome back to my podcast. If this story is already making your heart race, smash that like button right now and drop a comment telling me, have you ever been rejected for something you thought you were perfect for? Because trust me, this story is about to get wild. Don't forget to subscribe because you're not going to want to miss how this ends. Now, let me tell you what happened before this nightmare began. 2 months earlier, I was living in the smallest studio apartment in Brooklyn, surviving on ramen noodles and dreams. My name is Lila Chen, I was 22 years old, and I was absolutely convinced I was going to be the next Gigi Hadid. I mean, why wouldn't I be? I had the height, 5'9" in bare feet. I had the bone structure, cheekbones you could hang a coat on. I had the dedication. I'd been practicing my runway walk in front of my cracked bathroom mirror since I was 14. And most importantly, I had the look that every agency wanted, thin. Really, really thin. I'd worked so hard to get there. Counted every calorie, measured every bite, turned down every pizza night with friends. While other girls my age were discovering late-night tacos and weekend brunches, I was drinking black coffee for breakfast and calling celery sticks dinner. My mom used to worry. She'd call from Ohio every week, her voice tight with concern. "Lila, honey, you sound tired. Are you eating enough? You know you don't have to do this modeling thing." But she didn't understand. Nobody understood. In the modeling world, thin wasn't just preferred, it was required. It was the entry fee, the password, the golden ticket. I'd spent 3 years in New York, working double shifts at a coffee shop in Soho, saving every penny for professional photos. I slept on a mattress on the floor and wore the same 3 outfits in rotation, but I had a portfolio that cost me $4,000 and looked like it belonged in Vogue. When I finally got the call back from Zenith Modeling Agency, the agency that represented half the Victoria's Secret angels, I literally cried in the subway station. This was it. This was my moment. Everything I'd sacrificed, every meal I'd skipped, every friendship I'd lost because I was too tired or too hungry to go out, it was all about to pay off. I remember walking into their offices that morning, my portfolio clutched against my chest like armor. The building was everything I'd dreamed of, floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art on the walls, beautiful people floating through the hallways like they owned the world. And they did own the world in a way. These were the people who decided who got to be on magazine covers, who walked in Fashion Week, who became household names. They were the gatekeepers of every little girl's dream. I'd practiced my introduction 100 times. I knew exactly what I was going to say, how I was going to stand, which photos to show first. I'd even practiced my signature in case they wanted to sign me on the spot. But here's what I didn't practice: getting slapped across the face and called a walking skeleton. The market has changed, Victoria continued, her voice dripping with disgust. Consumers want real women now. They want curves, they want health, they want someone who looks like they actually eat food. Not some concentration camp survivor wannabe. Every word hit me like a physical blow. The other girls in the waiting room weren't even pretending to look away anymore. They were staring openly, some with pity, others with the kind of relief that comes from watching someone else get eliminated from the competition. "But I can gain weight," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "If that's what you want, I can dash." "Gain weight?" Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Honey, you need to gain 50 pounds just to look human. And even then, it would look fake. Desperate. You can't just suddenly develop curves and expect us to believe your body positive." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more violent than her screaming. "Here's some free advice, sweetheart. Find a new dream. Because you will never work in this industry. Not for us, not for anyone. You're everything that's wrong with fashion, and we're not going backward." The room started spinning. I could taste copper in my mouth, could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I'd given up everything for this. Everything. "Security," Victoria called out, not even looking at me anymore. "Please escort Miss, whatever her name is, out of the building. And make sure she understands she's not welcome back." That's when something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped. Like a rubber band stretched too tight, finally releasing all that stored energy at once. I looked at Victoria Thorne, with her fake lips and her cruel eyes and her perfect size 0 dress, and I smiled. "You know what?" I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong. "Thank you." Victoria blinked, clearly not expecting this response. "Thank you for showing me exactly who you are," I continued, taking a step toward her instead of backing away. "Thank you for proving that this industry is everything people say it is. And thank you." I paused, letting the silence stretch until every person in that room was hanging on my next words. "Thank you for giving me the best reason in the world to destroy you." Victoria's face went white. "Excuse me?" But I was already walking toward the elevator, my head held high for the first time in years. The security guard reached for my arm, but I shook him off. "Don't worry," I called back over my shoulder. "I'll see myself out." "But Victoria?" She was still standing there, frozen in shock. "I'll be back. And when I am, you're going to beg me to sign with you." The elevator doors closed on her stunned face, and I rode down 30 floors in complete silence, my reflection staring back at me from the polished steel doors. I looked exactly like what Victoria said I was: a skeleton. A ghost. A girl who'd disappeared so completely trying to fit someone else's mold that there was barely anything left of her. But as I walked out onto the busy Manhattan street, something was already changing inside me. A fire was starting to burn where my stomach used to constantly ache from hunger. A plan was forming where my dreams used to live. If they wanted curves, I'd give them curves. If they wanted real, I'd show them what real looked like. And if they wanted to see what happened when you pushed the wrong girl too far, well, they were about to find out. Okay, I need to pause here because I'm literally getting chills remembering this moment. Can you imagine standing in that elevator, making a promise like that? Like, what would you have done in that situation? Would you have fought back? Or would you have just crumbled? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're loving this story so far, hit that subscribe button because Chapter 2 is where things get really crazy. We're talking about a transformation so dramatic, it literally broke the internet. But first, let me tell you about the first thing I did when I got home that day. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment, my legs shaking not from hunger for once, but from pure adrenaline. My cheeks still throbbed where Victoria had hit me, but it felt different now. Less like pain, more like fuel. The first thing I did was walk straight to my bathroom mirror, the same mirror where I'd practiced runway walks and studied every angle of my face for flaws. But this time, I really looked at myself. Victoria was right about one thing. I did look sick. My cheekbones jutted out like knife blades. My eyes looked huge and hollow in my gaunt face. My collarbones created shadows, so deep you could lose a quarter in them. When had I stopped seeing myself clearly? When had thin become disappearing? I grabbed my phone and did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I ordered pizza. A large pizza. With extra cheese and pepperoni and all the things I'd been denying myself since I decided to become a model. While I waited for it to arrive, I sat on my mattress and started Googling. But not modeling agencies or casting calls or diet tips like usual. Instead, I searched for something completely different. Body-positive influencers. Plus-size fashion bloggers. Curve models making millions. And holy shit, what I found changed everything. Girls who looked nothing like the stick-thin models I'd been trying to become, but who had hundreds of thousands of followers. Millions of followers. Brand deals with major companies. Magazine covers. Fashion week invitations. They weren't just making money, they were making a movement. And they all had something I'd forgotten how to have. They looked happy. Really, genuinely happy. Like they enjoyed their lives instead of just surviving them. When my pizza arrived, I ate 3 slices without counting calories. Without guilt. Without punishment exercises planned for later. I just ate because I was hungry, and it tasted incredible. That night, I made a list. Not a diet plan or a workout schedule like I'd made 1,000 times before. A revenge plan. Phase 1. Stop starving myself and start eating like a normal human being. Phase 2. Document my weight gain journey on social media with radical honesty about why I was doing it. Phase 3. Build a following by being everything the modeling industry said was wrong, real, curvy, unapologetic. Phase 4. Become so successful that Zenith would come crawling back. Phase 5. Slam the door in their faces, so hard it echoed. It sounded crazy, even to me. But I tried playing by their rules for 3 years, and look where it got me, slapped and humiliated in front of strangers. Time to write some new rules. The next morning, I woke up without that familiar gnawing hunger in my stomach, and I made my first TikTok video. I was sitting on my mattress, my hair unbrushed, no makeup, wearing an oversized t-shirt that used to be tight on me. "Hey," I said to my phone camera, my voice still rough from sleep. "My name is Lila, and yesterday I got rejected from a modeling agency because I was too thin." "Yeah, you heard that right. Too thin." I held up my phone, showing Victoria's business card. This woman told me I looked like a concentration camp survivor. She said I was everything wrong with fashion. She said I'd never work in this industry. I smiled at the camera, and for the first time in years, it wasn't forced. So, I'm going to prove her right. I'm never working in that industry. I'm going to create my own. The video got 12 views. But I posted another one the next day. And the next. And the next. I documented everything. The first time I ate breakfast without guilt, the day I threw out my bathroom scale, the moment I bought groceries without reading nutrition labels. I talked about the modeling industry, about impossible beauty standards, about what it felt like to slowly disappear trying to fit into someone else's idea of perfect. At first, it was just for me, a way to stay accountable to my plan. But slowly, something incredible started happening. Other girls started commenting. Girls who'd been through the same thing. Girls who were tired of hating their bodies, tired of starving themselves, tired of feeling like they weren't enough unless they were less. My following grew from 12 views to 100, then 1,000, then 10,000. And as the numbers climbed, something else was changing too. My body. I was gaining weight, not drastically, not in an unhealthy way, but steadily. My face filled out, my curves started developing, my energy came back. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman instead of a ghost. But more importantly, I felt powerful in a way I never had when I was thin. This wasn't about fitting into someone else's mold anymore. This was about breaking the mold entirely. 3 months after Victoria slapped me, I had 50,000 followers and my first brand collaboration with a lingerie company that specialized in inclusive sizing. They sent me beautiful pieces in colors I'd never imagined wearing, and when I posted the photos, the response was explosive. This is what confidence looks like. You're glowing. Thank you for showing us it's okay to take up space. But my favorite comment came from a girl named Sarah. I threw out my scale because of you. I'm eating pizza for the first time in 2 years. Thank you for saving my life. That's when I knew this was bigger than revenge. This was revolution. 6 months after my humiliation at Zenith, I had 200,000 followers across all platforms. I was making more money than I'd ever dreamed of as a model. Fashion brands were sending me free clothes, restaurants were inviting me for collaborations, and magazines were reaching out for interviews. But the best part? I was happy. Actually, genuinely happy for the first time since I'd moved to New York. I was also a size 14, with curves that filled out my clothes in ways that made me feel powerful instead of ashamed. My face was round and bright, my body was strong and healthy, and my confidence was unshakable. Which is why I wasn't entirely surprised when my phone rang on a Tuesday morning and the caller ID showed a number I'd memorized but never wanted to see again. Zenith Modeling Agency. I let it ring 4 times before I answered. My voice honey sweet. Lila Chen speaking. Miss Chen? The voice on the other end was nervous, definitely not Victoria. This is Amanda from Zenith Modeling Agency. We were wondering if you might be available to come in for a meeting this week. I smiled at my reflection in the window of my new apartment, a real 1-bedroom with actual furniture and natural light. A meeting about what? Well, we've been following your social media presence, and we think you'd be a perfect fit for our new Body Positive campaign. We'd love to discuss representation opportunities. Body Positive campaign. From the agency that literally slapped me for being too thin. Interesting, I said, my voice giving nothing away. And who would I be meeting with? Victoria Thorne, our head of talent acquisition. She specifically requested to meet with you. Of course she did. I see. And what makes you think I'd be interested in working with Ms. Thorne? There was a pause. Well, we understand you might have concerns, but Victoria is very excited about the possibility of working together. She thinks you could be huge for us. Huge. There was irony in that word choice. Tell you what, I said, standing up and walking to my closet full of beautiful clothes in my actual size. I'll come in, but I want the meeting to be in the same conference room where she rejected me 6 months ago. And I want the same audience, every girl in that waiting room, every assistant, everyone who was there that day. That's a very specific request. It's not a request. It's a requirement. If Victoria wants to meet with me, those are my terms. Another pause. I'll check with her and get back to you. You do that. But Amanda? Yes. Tell Victoria that Lila Chun is coming back. Just like I promised. I hung up and immediately called my best friend Maya, who'd been documenting this entire journey with her camera. Maya, remember when you said you wanted to film something that would go viral? Yeah, why? Pack your equipment. We're about to make the video that breaks the internet.
Oh, my God.
Can you feel that energy? Like, I'm literally getting goosebumps just thinking about what's about to happen. Victoria Thorne is about to get served the coldest dish of revenge in modeling history, and I am here for it. But here's what I want to know from you guys. Do you think Lila should take the meeting? Should she give Victoria a chance to apologize? Or should she go full savage mode? Drop your predictions in the comments, because I guarantee you're not going to guess how this plays out. And if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe because you need to know what happened next, and that was where we get our revenge. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. That was the only word for what Victoria Thorne was doing as she stood in the center of the same glass conference room where she destroyed me 6 months ago. Her perfectly manicured hands were actually clasped together in front of her chest, her voice cracking with desperation as she spoke to my back. Please, Lila.
Just hear me out.
The industry has changed. We've changed. I didn't turn around. Instead, I stayed facing the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Manhattan skyline while Maya quietly filmed everything from the corner of the room. The same waiting room full of hopeful models was visible through the glass walls, and every single one of them was pretending not to stare while hanging on every word. Have you, though? I asked, my voice calm as silk. Because 6 months ago, you told me I'd never work in this industry. You said I was everything wrong with fashion. You said I looked like a concentration camp survivor. Victoria flinched like I'd slapped her. Which, fair enough, she'd slapped me first. That was a mistake. I was having a bad day, and I took it out on you unfairly. Now I turned around, and I watched her face change as she really looked at me for the first time since I'd walked into this building. The girl who'd left here 6 months ago had been a skeleton wrapped in expensive clothes. The woman standing here now was a goddess. I was wearing a custom-made dress that hugged every single one of my curves, deep emerald green that made my skin glow and my dark hair shine. My makeup was flawless, my confidence was radiating from every pore, and my smile was sharp enough to cut glass. But most importantly, I looked happy. Really, genuinely, powerfully happy. Victoria's mouth opened slightly, like she was seeing a completely different person, which in many ways she was. A bad day, I repeated, raising one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. You had a bad day, so you decided to physically assault a young woman and destroy her dreams. It wasn't assault, Victoria said quickly, but her voice was weak. It was just what? A love tap? A gentle correction. I took a step toward her, and she actually backed up. The woman who'd terrified me 6 months ago was now cowering in front of me, and the reversal was intoxicating. Let me tell you about my bad day, Victoria. My bad day was surviving on coffee and celery sticks for 3 years. My bad day was fainting on the subway because I hadn't eaten in 18 hours. My bad day was watching my hair fall out because I was so malnourished my body was eating itself. Each word hit her like a physical blow, and I could see her starting to realize just how badly she'd miscalculated. But you know what wasn't a bad day? I smiled, and it was predatory. The day you rejected me, because that day changed my entire life. Wait, I need to pause here because you guys need to understand how we got to this moment. The phone call from Zenith wasn't the first sign that my plan was working. Let me rewind and tell you about the weeks leading up to this meeting, because the transformation was about so much more than just my body. 3 weeks before Victoria called begging for meeting, something incredible happened. I was at a coffee shop in Brooklyn, the same one where I used to work double shifts, when a woman approached my table. "Excuse me," she said, her voice nervous but determined. "Are you Lila Chin, the TikTok girl?" I looked up from my laptop where I'd been editing content, and I saw a girl who looked exactly like I used to. Hollow cheeks, sharp collarbones, eyes too big for her gaunt face. "Yeah, that's me. I just wanted to say thank you." Her voice was shaking. "I've been following your journey, and I threw out my scale last week. I ate a full meal for the first time in 6 months. I know it sounds stupid, but you literally saved my life." It didn't sound stupid. It sounded like the most important thing anyone had ever said to me. We talked for 2 hours. Her name was Emma. She was 19, and she'd been rejected by 4 modeling agencies for being too commercial, industry speak for not thin enough. She'd been starving herself trying to reach their impossible standards, and watching my content had shown her there was another way. "I want to try your approach," she said, "building my own platform instead of begging them to accept me." "It's not easy," I warned her. "The trolls are brutal. The industry will try to tear you down. You have to be ready for war." "I'm already at war," she replied. "With myself, with my body, with food. At least your way, I get to fight back." That conversation lit a fire under me, because Emma wasn't the only one. My DMs were flooded with similar stories, girls who'd been destroyed by the modeling industry's impossible standards, who were finding their way back to themselves through my content. I wasn't just building a platform anymore. I was leading a movement. The next week, Vogue Italia reached out. Vogue. They wanted to feature me in their body positivity issue, alongside established plus-size models who'd been fighting this fight for years. The photo shoot was everything I dreamed my first Vogue shoot would be, but better. Because instead of feeling anxious about every angle, worried about looking too fat or too thin or too anything, I felt powerful. The photographer kept saying, "Yes, that confidence, that energy, that's exactly what we want." When the issue came out, my follower count exploded. I went from 200K to over 1 million in a single week. Fashion brands started throwing money at me. Major retailers wanted collaborations. I was making more in a month than most models made in a year. But the real victory came when I got a DM from a verified account that made my heart skip a beat. At Zenith Modeling Agency. "Hi Lila, we'd love to set up a meeting to discuss potential opportunities. When are you available?" I screenshot it and sent it to Maya immediately. Maya was like, "Holy Lord, are you going to respond?" I said, "Oh, I'm going to respond, but not how they expect." I waited 3 days before replying, long enough to let them wonder if I'd seen it, long enough to make them sweat. I said, "I'm always available to discuss how the modeling industry needs to change. Let me know when Victoria Thorne would like to apologize." The response came within an hour. At Zenith Modeling Agency. "Miss Thorne would be delighted to meet with you at your earliest convenience. Would tomorrow work?" Tomorrow. They were desperate. I said, "I'll need the meeting to be filmed for my documentary. And I'll need it to take place in the exact same room where she rejected me, with witnesses present. These are non-negotiable terms." There was a longer pause this time. I could practically feel them panicking on the other end. At Zenith Modeling Agency. "We can accommodate those requests. How about Thursday at 2 p.m.?
Perfect.
That would give me time to prepare, to get Maya's equipment set up, and to plan exactly what I wanted to say. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about changing an entire industry. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. Not from nerves. I was way past being nervous around Victoria Thorne. But from excitement. From anticipation. From the knowledge that tomorrow, I was going to do something that would ripple through the fashion world for years to come. I spent hours getting ready that morning. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted to look like exactly what I'd become: successful, confident, and completely unbothered by their opinion of my body. The dress I chose was custom-made by an up-and-coming designer who specialized in curve-friendly fashion. It fit like a second skin, highlighting every curve I'd gained, every inch of space I'd decided to take up in the world. My makeup was flawless, but not overdone. I wanted to look polished, not like I was trying too hard. My hair fell in loose waves over my shoulders, and my jewelry was minimal but expensive. The kind of expensive that whispered instead of shouted. Most importantly, I wore a smile. Not the desperate, "please like me" smile I used to practice in the mirror, but the confident, "I know exactly who I am" smile that had taken me 6 months to find. Walking into that building felt like stepping into a movie about my own life. The same marble lobby, the same intimidating elevator, the same sterile hallways. But this time, I wasn't a desperate girl with a portfolio clutched to her chest. This time, I was the star of the show. The waiting room fell silent when I walked through it. The same hopeful models who'd watched me get humiliated 6 months ago were now staring at me with recognition. I could hear whispers. "That's Lila Chen, the TikTok girl. She has like 2 million followers. She was on the cover of Vogue." I gave them a small wave as I passed, the same friendly gesture I'd have wanted someone to give me when I was sitting in their shoes. Maya was already set up in the conference room, her camera equipment positioned to capture everything. Victoria was pacing near the windows, clearly nervous. When she saw me, her face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on what was probably supposed to be a warm smile. "Lila," she said, her voice artificially bright. "You look amazing." "Really?" "Absolutely stunning."
I didn't smile back.
Instead, I took my time settling into a chair, the same chair where I'd been sitting when she slapped me. Maya gave me a subtle thumbs up from behind her camera. "Thank you," I said simply. "Shall we begin?" Guys, I need you to understand something. This moment, sitting in that chair, looking at the woman who destroyed my dreams, should have felt like victory. But honestly, it felt bigger than that. It felt like justice. Not just for me, but for every girl who'd ever been told she wasn't the right size, the right shape, the right anything. Are you feeling this energy? Because it's about to get intense. I'll be direct, Victoria said, settling into the chair across from me. We want to offer you a contract. To do what? To be the face of our new body positive initiative. We're launching a curve division, and we think you'd be perfect to lead it. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Victoria shifted in her chair, clearly expecting a different reaction. Tell me about this body positive initiative, I said finally. Victoria launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech about inclusivity and representing real women and changing with the times. All the buzzwords, all the corporate speak that meant absolutely nothing. And you think I'm the right person for this because you've built an incredible platform. Your audience trusts you. You've become synonymous with body positivity and self-acceptance. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. And 6 months ago, when I was sitting in this exact same chair, what did you think I was synonymous with? Victoria's confident expression faltered. Lila, I've already apologized for that. It was a mistake, a moment of poor judgment. Actually, you haven't apologized. Not once. You said it was a mistake, but you haven't apologized for slapping me across the face and telling me I looked like a concentration camp survivor. The room went dead silent. Through the glass walls, I could see the models in the waiting room leaning forward, trying to catch every word. You're right, Victoria said quietly.
I'm sorry.
I'm truly, deeply sorry for how I treated you. Are you sorry for what you did, or are you sorry that it didn't work out the way you planned?
Victoria blinked.
I don't understand. I think you do. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more powerful than shouting. You thought you were crushing a weak, desperate girl who would slink away and never bother you again. But instead, you created your biggest threat. Threat? Victoria's voice was getting higher. Lila, we're not threats to each other. We should be partners. You've proven there's a market for curve models, and we want to capitalize on that. Capitalize. There was the truth, finally. You want to capitalize on the movement I built from the ashes of the humiliation you put me through. We want to work together. No, I said, standing up smoothly.
You want to use me.
You want to slap your agency's name on my success and pretend you were part of this revolution instead of the reason it was necessary. Victoria shot to her feet too, panic creeping into her voice. Lila, please. We can offer you things no other agency can. Money, connections, magazine covers, Fashion Week. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. Victoria, I've been on more magazine covers in the last 3 months than most of your models see in their entire careers. I make more money in a week than your agency probably offered me in a year. And as for Fashion Week, I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen where my calendar was packed with invitations from designers who specifically wanted me, not just any model. I don't need you for any of that. The question is, what do you need me for? Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. The desperation she'd been trying to hide came pouring out. You're killing us, she said, her voice cracking. Every girl who follows you is a girl who won't starve herself to fit our standards. Every brand that works with you is a brand that doesn't need traditional models. You're not just succeeding, you're making our entire business model obsolete. There it was. The truth. And you thought if you could sign me, you could control the narrative. Put your name on the revolution and pretend you'd been progressive all along. We can change. Victoria was fully begging now. We can be better. We can represent all body types, all sizes. You could help us transform the industry from the inside. I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd held so much power over my dreams just months ago, who now looked small and desperate and utterly defeated. Victoria, I said softly, do you remember what you said to me the day you slapped me? She nodded miserably. You said I'd never work in this industry. You said I was everything wrong with fashion. You said the market had changed and wanted real women, not girls like me. I was wrong about you specifically, but I was right about the market. You were wrong about everything. The market didn't want real women. You just didn't know how to sell them. The industry wasn't changing, it was being forced to change by people like me who refused to disappear. I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. But you were right about one thing. I was never going to work in your industry. I was going to create my own. Lila, wait. Victoria called after me. We can make you the highest paid model in our agency. We can give you creative control. We can. I turned back one final time, and my smile was pure ice. Victoria, 6 months ago, you had the chance to be part of something revolutionary. You could have been the agency that discovered the girl who changed everything. Instead, you chose to be the villain in my story. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, speaking loud enough for every person in that waiting room to hear. Good luck explaining to your shareholders why you rejected the most successful model of 2025 because she wasn't thin enough. The waiting room erupted in whispers as I walked through it, Maya following with her camera still rolling. But I wasn't done yet. I stopped in the middle of the room and turned to face all the hopeful models who were sitting in the same chairs where I'd once waited for my dreams to come true. Ladies, I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. Let me give you some advice. Stop waiting for them to choose you. Choose yourself. I pulled out a business card, my business card, with my management company's information on it. I'm starting my own agency. One that represents real women of all sizes. One that doesn't slap you for being exactly who you are. If you're tired of starving yourself for people who don't deserve you, give me a call. I set the card on the reception desk and walked toward the elevator, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to Victoria's doom. Behind me, I could hear chaos erupting. Girls asking questions, Victoria shouting my name, assistants trying to restore order. But I didn't look back. The elevator doors closed, and Maya finally stopped filming. Holy shit, Lila, she breathed. That was just the beginning, I said, pulling out my phone to post the teaser video we'd planned. Now comes the real revenge. My God. You guys. Can you even believe what just happened? Victoria Thorne literally begged the same girl she slapped and called a skeleton. But here's the thing. Lila's not done. Not even close. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just proving someone wrong, it's completely destroying the system that gave them power in the first place. Drop a fire emoji in the comments if you think Victoria got what she deserved, and smash that subscribe button because Chapter 3 is going to blow your mind. We're talking about a plot twist so big, it literally changed the entire modeling industry forever. The sound of Victoria Thorne's phone hitting the marble floor echoed through the empty Zenith offices as she stared at the screen displaying the breaking news alert. Her perfectly composed face cracked like expensive porcelain, revealing something I'd never seen before. Pure, unadulterated terror. Breaking. Zenith Modeling Agency under federal investigation for workplace abuse and discriminatory practices. Anonymous tips pour in after viral video exposes industry toxicity. But that wasn't even the headline that made her sink into her chair like a deflated balloon. It was the one underneath it. Lila Chen's Curves Empire becomes fastest growing modeling agency in history, signs 200 models in 24 hours. I watched it all unfold from my new office, a gorgeous space in Soho with floor-to-ceiling windows and inspirational quotes about body positivity painted on the walls. Maya had hidden cameras throughout Zenith's building, completely legally, of course, public spaces and all that, and we were live streaming Victoria's meltdown to my 5 million followers. The comments were brutal. Karma is a beautiful thing, fire, fire, fire. Victoria really thought she could destroy Lila and face no consequences? This is what happens when you mess with the wrong woman. Justice for Lila. But my favorite comment came from someone with the username @Emerizing. Thanks to Lila, I just signed with an agency that celebrates my curves instead of starving them away. The revolution is here.
Emma.
The girl from the coffee shop who'd been brave enough to choose herself. She was now one of my top models, and her story had inspired thousands of others to break free from the industry's toxic standards. Ma'am? My assistant knocked on my office door. Victoria Thorne is on line 1. She says it's urgent. I smiled and picked up the phone. putting it on speaker so Maya could catch every word for our documentary. Lila Chen speaking. You destroyed me. Victoria's voice was raw with desperation and fury. The investigation, the media circus, the clients pulling out, this is all your fault. Actually, I said, examining my perfectly manicured nails, this is all your fault. I just provided the evidence. Evidence? What evidence? I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the kind that supported all my curves comfortably instead of punishing them. Victoria, did you really think you were the only agency head who treated models like garbage? Did you think yours was the only company with a culture of abuse and impossible standards? Silence on the other end. When my video went viral, something beautiful happened. Hundreds of models started sharing their own stories. Models who'd been blacklisted for gaining weight, models who'd been pressured into dangerous diets, models who'd been sexually harassed by photographers and told to keep quiet or lose their careers. That has nothing to do with me, doesn't it? Because a lot of those stories mentioned Zenith specifically. A lot of them mentioned you. Hold up, I need to rewind because you guys are missing the insane chain of events that led to this moment. Because when I walked out of that meeting with Victoria, I wasn't just angry anymore. I was strategic. And what happened next was the most beautiful destruction of a toxic system I've ever witnessed. The video Maya and I posted that evening was titled, "The Meeting That Changed Everything," facing the woman who destroyed my dreams. Within 6 hours, it had 2 million views. Within 24 hours, it was trending on every platform. But more importantly, it opened floodgates. The comment section became a support group for models who'd been traumatized by the industry. Story after story poured in. Zenith told me I was too fat at size 2 and needed to lose 15 pounds. A photographer at a Zenith shoot told me I could book more jobs if I was more flexible about what I was willing to do. Victoria Thorne personally told me I was commercial pretty, but not editorial skinny, and should consider becoming a plus-size model. I was a size 6. I fainted during a Zenith casting because I hadn't eaten in 3 days trying to fit their requirements. They told me to come back when I had better stamina. Each comment was a dagger, but together they were a sword. And I knew exactly what to do with that weapon. I called my lawyer. Yes, I had a lawyer now because successful business owners protect themselves. Sarah, I need you to look into something. I think we might have grounds for a class action lawsuit. Against who? Zenith Modeling Agency. And I think we're going to have a lot of plaintiffs. While Sarah worked on the legal angle, I focused on building something better. The comment about starting my own agency hadn't been just a dramatic exit line. It was a promise I intended to keep. I'd been thinking about it for weeks, actually. What would a modeling agency look like if it was built by someone who understood what it felt like to be rejected, to be told you weren't enough, to have your dreams shattered by someone else's narrow definition of beauty? It would be revolutionary. I started making calls. Not to investors or industry insiders, but to the models themselves. The girls who'd been rejected for being too big, too small, too ethnic, too old, too unconventional. The girls who had talent and beauty and charisma but didn't fit into the industry's tiny box. I'm starting something new, I told each of them. A place where your worth isn't measured by your measurements. Are you interested? The response was overwhelming. Within a week, I had a list of 50 models who wanted to be part of something different. Within 2 weeks, I had enough interest to actually make it happen. I called the agency Curves Empire, not because it was only for plus-size models, but because curves represented everything the traditional industry was afraid of.
Deviation from the straight line.
Unexpected beauty. Taking up space unapologetically. The business plan was simple. Represent models of all sizes, all ethnicities, all ages. Focus on authenticity over conformity. Pay fair rates and provide mental health support. Treat models like human beings instead of hangers for clothes. Revolutionary concepts, apparently. I launched with a video that broke the internet. 6 months ago, I was told I'd never work in the modeling industry because I was too thin, then too fat, then just too much. Today, I'm not just working in the industry, I'm changing it. The video showed before and after shots of me, but not in the typical weight loss way. Instead, it showed the hollow, desperate girl I'd been versus the confident, powerful woman I'd become. It showed my bank statements, the impressive ones, my magazine covers, my brand partnerships. This is what happens when you stop asking for permission and start taking what's yours. Then came the bombshell announcement. I'm launching Curves Empire, a modeling agency that represents real people. All sizes, all colors, all ages, all stories. We're not here to fit into the industry's standards. We're here to set new ones. And to every agency that rejected these incredible humans for not being the right type of beautiful, watch us prove you wrong. The response was immediate and explosive. Models started tagging themselves #CurvesEmpire. Brands reached out wanting to work with us. Fashion magazines requested interviews. But the best response came from an unexpected source, a federal investigator named Agent Martinez who slid into my DMs with a very interesting proposition. Ms. Chun, we've been monitoring the conversations around your recent video. Would you be willing to speak with us about your experiences with modeling agencies? Off the record, of course. It turned out that my video had caught the attention of people who'd been building a case against several modeling agencies for labor violations, discriminatory practices, and creating hostile work environments. My story, combined with the hundreds of testimonials flooding social media, gave them exactly what they needed to move forward. We've been investigating complaints about Zenith for months, Agent Martinez explained during our confidential meeting. But models are afraid to come forward officially because they fear being blacklisted. Your platform has given them a voice. What do you need from me? Honestly, just keep doing what you're doing. Document everything. Save every communication. And if you're willing, we'd like you to wear a wire to any future meetings with industry figures.
White.
Like I was taking down the mafia instead of a modeling agency. Agent Martinez, I said, I'd be happy to help you burn this whole corrupt system to the ground. That's how I found myself sitting in my new office, watching Victoria's world crumble in real time while I built something better from the ashes. The federal investigation moved fast once they had enough evidence. Zenith was hit with charges ranging from workplace discrimination to creating a hostile work environment to violations of labor laws. Other agencies started getting subpoenas. Industry executives began lawyering up. But while they were fighting legal battles, I was winning the war that actually mattered, the cultural one. Curves Empire signed 200 models in our first week. Major brands started reaching out, wanting to work with agencies that represented real diversity instead of just talking about it. Fashion weeks around the world began featuring our models. Most importantly, the conversation changed. Suddenly, other agencies were scrambling to sign curve models, older models, models of different ethnicities. Not because they'd had a moral awakening, but because we'd proven there was money in authenticity. The industry was changing, and they were desperately trying to catch up. You guys, I wish you could see my face right now because I am living for this justice. But wait until you hear what Victoria does next, because this woman was not going down without a fight. And when desperate people do desperate things, well, let's just say the story gets even wilder. I can make this all go away, Victoria said on the phone, her voice shifting from desperation to something that sounded almost like her old arrogance. The investigation, the media attention, all of it. I have connections. Is that a threat, Victoria? It's a reality check. You think you've won, but you have no idea how deep this industry goes. How many powerful people you've just made enemies of. I put the phone on mute and looked at Maya, who was frantically signaling toward the recording equipment. The FBI had indeed asked us to document everything, and Victoria was about to give us exactly what we needed. Are you threatening me? I asked, taking the phone off mute. I'm offering you a deal. Walk away from the agency. Stop cooperating with the investigation. Go back to being just an influencer, and we'll all forget this little tantrum ever happened. And if I don't, then you'll learn why models who cross us never work again.
Click.
She'd hung up, but not before giving us a recorded confession of industry blacklisting, which, as Agent Martinez had explained, was highly illegal. I immediately forwarded the recording to the FBI and posted a screenshot of Victoria's number calling me to my social media with a caption, When you're winning so hard that your enemies start making threats. Thinking face hashtag curves empire hashtag receipts for days. The post went viral within minutes. Hashtag Victoria threats started trending. People were furious that she was still trying to intimidate me even while under investigation. But Victoria had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was the same scared girl she'd slapped 6 months ago. The girl who would crumble under pressure and slink away. Instead, I was a woman who'd built an empire on not backing down. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with notifications. Maya was already at my apartment, her laptop open and her face pale. "Lila, you need to see this." She turned the screen toward me, and my heart stopped. Someone had leaked my personal information online. My home address, my phone number, my family's information in Ohio. Worse, they'd leaked private photos from my before period, photos where I looked sick and skeletal, with cruel captions about how I was promoting anorexia and fake body positivity. The comments under the leaked information were terrifying. Someone should teach this fat bitch a lesson. She's at my actual address. Time for a house visit. Lila Chin ruined my modeling career. Someone needs to shut her up. Maya, we need to call the police. And Agent Martinez. This is escalating. But as I was reaching for my phone, it started ringing. Unknown number. Don't answer it, Maya said quickly. But something made me pick up anyway. Is this the fat bitch who thinks she's changing the world? The voice was male, rough, and absolutely terrifying. I hung up immediately and called 911. Within an hour, my apartment was swarming with police and FBI agents. Agent Martinez looked grim as she surveyed the online harassment. "This is coordinated," she said. "This isn't just Victoria acting alone. Someone with resources is behind this." "What kind of resources?" "The kind that can hire hackers to breach your private accounts and organize harassment campaigns." "Lila, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." My stomach dropped. "Okay. Are you willing to see this through to the end? Because if you are, we can protect you and use this escalation to take down the entire network. But if you want to walk away, now would be the time." I looked around my apartment. My safe space that had been violated, my privacy that had been destroyed, my family that was now at risk because I dared to fight back against a system that was designed to crush people like me. I thought about Emma, signing with an agency that celebrated her curves. I thought about the hundreds of models who'd shared their stories because I'd given them courage. I thought about every girl who is starving herself right now, trying to fit into someone else's definition of beautiful. "Agent Martinez," I said, my voice steady as steel. "Let's burn it all down." Guys, I cannot even begin to tell you what happened next, because it was like watching a real-life movie. The FBI, corporate espionage, international modeling agencies, millions of dollars in lawsuits. This story gets so much bigger than just Victoria. But I need to know, are you Team Lila all the way? Because what she does next requires the kind of courage most people never find. Drop a fire if you're ready for the epic conclusion. What happened next was the most beautiful example of karma I've ever witnessed. The harassment campaign that was meant to destroy me actually gave the FBI everything they needed to uncover a massive conspiracy. It turned out that Victoria wasn't just a mean agency head. She was part of a network of industry executives who'd been systematically suppressing models who didn't fit their standards. They had blacklists. Actual spreadsheets with names of models who'd been marked as difficult for things like asking for fair pay, refusing inappropriate requests, or, in my case, threatening their business model. They had coordinated campaigns to destroy careers. They had relationships with photographers who would sabotage shoots for blacklisted models. They had connections with fashion magazines who would spike features that showcased problematic talent. Most damning of all, they had a private chat group called Quality Control, where they shared photos of models they wanted to discourage and strategies for pushing them out of the industry. My before photos? They'd been stolen from my old agency applications and shared in that chat with captions like "poster child for anorexia," "need to distance ourselves," and "perfect example of why we need BMI requirements." The FBI raid on Zenith happened at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. I wasn't there, obviously, but Maya and I watched the news coverage from my new temporary apartment. The FBI had moved me for safety. Watching Victoria being let out in handcuffs was surreal. This woman who'd seemed so powerful, so untouchable, looked small and ordinary surrounded by federal agents. But the real victory came later that day, when Agent Martinez called with an update. Lila, we found something in Victoria's files that you need to know about. What? A folder labeled Lila Chen, Termination Strategy. It contained a detailed plan to destroy your career that started the day you left their office. My blood ran cold. What kind of plan? They were going to wait until you got successful, then release photos and videos of you from your thinnest period with claims that you were promoting eating disorders. They were going to have fake medical experts question your health. They were going to pressure brands to drop you by threatening to pull their other models. But I got successful faster than they expected.
Exactly.
So they escalated to harassment and intimidation. Lila, you didn't just accidentally stumble into a fight with Victoria Thorne. She declared war on you the moment you walked out of that meeting. The realization hit me like a truck. Every success I'd achieved, every milestone I'd celebrated, Victoria had been plotting to tear down. My happiness, my healing, my entire empire. She'd been planning to destroy all of it. There's more, Agent Martinez continued. We found evidence that this network extends internationally. Modeling agencies in Paris, Milan, London, all connected, all sharing blacklists, all working together to maintain control over who gets to be successful. How many agencies? 47 so far. 47 agencies. Hundreds of executives. Thousands of models whose careers had been destroyed by a system designed to maintain power at any cost. But here's the thing about bullies. When you finally stand up to them, they crumble faster than you ever imagined. The international scandal that followed made my story look like a footnote. Agencies shut down overnight. Executives fled to countries without extradition treaties. Models came forward with stories that made my experience look mild. And in the middle of all that chaos, something beautiful happened.
The industry changed.
Not slowly, not reluctantly, but completely and permanently. New agencies opened that specialized in diverse representation. Existing agencies scrambled to reform their practices. Brands started prioritizing authenticity over traditional beauty standards. Most importantly, models stopped being afraid. The culture of silence that had protected abusers for decades was shattered. Models started demanding fair treatment, fair pay, and basic human dignity. They started supporting each other instead of competing for scraps. Curve's empire became the template for how agencies should operate. We were featured in business schools as a case study in ethical entrepreneurship. We were invited to speak at UN conferences about workplace equality. But my favorite moment came 6 months after Victoria's arrest, when I got a letter forwarded from her prison cell. Lila, I've had a lot of time to think about what I did to you and to so many others. I know sorry isn't enough, but I need you to know that you were right about everything. The industry was broken and I was a big part of breaking it. I spent my whole career thinking that my job was to maintain standards, but really I was just maintaining a system that hurt people. You didn't just build a successful business. You proved that there was a better way. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope someday you can find peace with what happened. You turned the worst day of your life into a revolution, and that's something I'll never be able to take away from you. Victoria. I read that letter 3 times, then put it in a frame on my office wall. Not because I forgave her. That was a process that would take time, but because it reminded me of something important. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up being the ones who change us for the better. Oh my God, you guys, we're almost at the end, and I'm literally crying. This story is about so much more than modeling or revenge or even justice. It's about what happens when you refuse to let other people's limitations become your reality. But wait until you hear how this actually ends, because Lila's final move is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. 1 year after Victoria slapped me in that conference room, I stood on the stage at New York Fashion Week addressing an audience that included editors from every major magazine, designers from every luxury brand, and models from every agency, including several that had rejected me in my early days. But the moment that mattered most was when I looked into the audience and saw Emma, the girl from the coffee shop who'd thrown out her scale because of my story. She was sitting in the front row wearing a stunning gown that celebrated every curve of her healthy, strong body. A year ago, I began, my voice carrying to every corner of the venue. I was told I'd never work in this industry because I didn't fit their mold. Today, I'm not just working in this industry, I'm changing what that mold looks like. The applause was thunderous, but I held up my hand for silence. This isn't a story about revenge, even though that's what it might look like from the outside. This is a story about what happens when you stop asking for permission to exist as you are. I gestured to the runway behind me, where models of every size, age, and ethnicity were preparing for the show. These women aren't here because they fit into someone else's definition of beautiful. They're here because they refused to disappear when the world told them they were too much or not enough. In the audience, I could see photographers wiping tears from their eyes as they continued shooting. This wasn't just a fashion show. It was a declaration of war against every system that profited from people's insecurities. The modeling industry told us that only one type of beauty was valuable. We proved them wrong. The media told us that diversity was just a trend. We proved them wrong. Society told us that our worth was measured by our measurements. We proved them wrong. The models began walking the runway, and the energy in the room was electric. These weren't women apologizing for taking up space. They were women celebrating the space they'd claimed. To every person watching this who has ever been told they're not enough, you are not the problem. The system that made you feel that way is the problem. And systems can be changed. I paused, thinking about that scared girl in the elevator who'd promised to come back and make Victoria beg. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. Sometimes the best revenge is building something so beautiful, so powerful, so undeniably successful that they have no choice but to admit they were wrong. The final model walked the runway, a stunning woman in her 60s who'd been told she was too old to model until Curve's Empire signed her, and she became the face of a major skincare campaign. This is our industry now, and we're just getting started. As the applause exploded around me, I felt something I'd never experienced before, complete peace with my story. Every rejection, every criticism, every moment of doubt had led me to this stage, in front of these people, with this message. I'd kept my promise to that broken girl in the elevator. I'd come back, Victoria had begged, and I'd slammed the door in her face. But more than that, I'd built something that would outlast any revenge, a world where the next girl who walked into a modeling agency wouldn't have to choose between her dreams and her dignity. That night, as I sat in my penthouse apartment, yes, I bought a penthouse, success tastes better than skinny ever felt, I got a message that made me cry happy tears. Hi Lila, my name is Sarah and I'm 16. I just got signed by a modeling agency that saw your interview and decided to change their standards. They told me I was perfect exactly as I am. Thank you for making sure girls like me don't have to go through what you did. You saved my life without even knowing it. I screenshot that message and added it to my inspiration board, right next to the photo of me from that first day, the day Victoria slapped me and accidentally created her own worst nightmare. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. Sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up being the ones who make you unstoppable. And sometimes the best revenge is living so well, so authentically, so unapologetically that you turn your pain into power and your story into someone else's salvation. That's Curves of Revenge, not just fighting back, but fighting forward. And we're still fighting. Holy shit, you guys. Are you crying? Because I'm crying. This story just proves that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. Lila didn't just get revenge. She got revolution. She didn't just change her life. She changed an entire industry. If this story inspired you, if it made you think about your own dreams and the people who tried to crush them, drop a comment below. Share your own comeback story. Tell me about a time someone underestimated you and lived to regret it. And please hit that subscribe button and share the story with someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere out there is the next Lila Chin, waiting for permission to stop shrinking herself to fit other people's expectations. Remember, you are not too much. You are not enough. You are exactly who you're supposed to be, and the world needs what you have to offer. This is your reminder to choose yourself, fight for yourself, and never let anyone else's limitations become your reality. Thank you for listening to this wild ride. I'll see you in the next story. Fire Flex Biceps Crown.